Hey, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Thanks for having us here, and we're just having a little screen change going on, but in the meantime, I'm just gonna give you a little bit of overview. I've got a great panel of people here who each bring different level of experiences, from designing rooms to using them, and also creating the technology behind immersive audio and the decision-making processes that we're going to examine together have been well thought out by this team. In just a moment, I can introduce the team with some slides. All right. Future-proof studio design. We're going to talk about creating spaces for immersive and stereo mixing. A little more emphasis on the immersive decision-making, because everybody's had a stereo room if you've ever, or been in a studio. Those are something we've all been through. The agenda is, we're just going to go through these topics and take a look at what we're going to go over, and we've got some good questions to kind of ask and answer as we go through this. We're going to be examining studio design, acoustics, equipment decisions, and creating your own immersive and stereo audio production rooms. I'm Dave Malekpour. I've been creating studios for almost 40 years. Started in about 1989 as my own. We've got Josh Goodwin, one of the greatest mixers of all time. We've got Emma Brooks from Dolby, Kerry Thomas, was originally, I met Kerry at Dolby, and then he went on to Apple Music, and now has a company called Immersive that's involved in consulting on bringing immersive audio technologies and modern production to the masses. Sam Barkow is an amazing acoustician, incredible history of creating rooms, but also room measurement software, Smart, which I happen to use almost every day in my work, and done some very impressive projects, including Jazz at Lincoln Center, and just some of the work he's done for the Grateful Dead, and Bob Weir, rest his soul. And Rafa Sardina, another great engineer, producer, and working in all kinds of different formats. And so we have some really great, relevant people to help us answer these questions. So I want to start by asking, how do we decide if we need to create an immersive studio or just go with stereo? And how can I prepare for immersive if I'm just upgrading an existing space? And I guess I would start asking this of, Kerry, I'm going to ask you that because I think, you've seen all of the perspectives, and can you ask me the first one? Yes. How do I decide if I create an immersive studio or just go stereo?
You definitely should.
That's a pretty easy answer.
There we go. The second part is harder.
Right. Well, but in making that decision, is that driven by the economics of it, or is it driven by the passion of it, or where do you think the most important decision making on that topic would be?
So I think the real answer here is, look, if your customers are likely to want to hear something like an Atmos, a 360, an immersive track in some way, then you should absolutely design your studio for that purpose, right? And I think when we all started kind of doing this, that was a very, very serious question. Like, who is going to want to do this? But the reality is that we're in a world where immersive of all varieties is now table stakes, right? It's the starting point. Yes, you should. Very, very few circumstances where I'd say just go with stereo at this point, because the proliferation of formats, of distribution, of consumer manufacturers adopting technology, and multi-purpose, multi-function studios is definitely growing. And so, yeah, I mean, today, unlike 5-6 years ago, I'd say it's a requirement to think about that design.
No, of course, I see this emerging thing as something that's really here. Something I spoke about with Emma, and I'm going to ask you to just comment on this, Emma. How many, on the consumer side, how many devices out there have been enabled with at least the Dolby Atmos playback capabilities?
Yeah, so there's 4 billion devices in market, and that's across, I mean, the phones that are in everyone's pockets, the headphones, the automotive manufacturers. So it's a constantly growing ecosystem, and people are going to hear those mixes in those different environments, and so it's really important, like we always talk about, to set it up in the right way.
So out of the 8 billion people in the world, 4 billion of them have access to this immersive format. That's a pretty impressive reason to answer the first question affirmatively, I'd say, you know, just that this is obviously something that's embedded in our future culture. You know, the second question about how do I prepare for immersive if I already got a studio and I got to upgrade it, because I think that's a lot of people out there as well. Sam, could you know, what do you think the basic considerations are without getting, you know, every decision, but what are the most important ones?
I think that there are a few sort of gotcha things where if you add more sources, more sound sources, you're enabling more destructive reflection paths. You're exciting a different set of modes than if you just have a stereo system. And believe it or not, many people who add speakers, particularly subwoofers, to their ceiling find shockingly that they've decreased the isolation of their ceiling or the isolation of their room because they didn't use isolation mounts to hang immersive speakers. So I think it requires a sort of holistic approach to the room acoustics, to the isolation, and to the listening environment, the mixed position.
You know, that brings up something you just sort of passed on the other day when we were chatting about how to mount your speakers, and you showed me a product from ISO Acoustics. This isn't a shameless plug or anything because I don't care which one you use, but I hadn't seen that one before, and I thought it was really relevant because as you put your speakers up in the ceiling, first you're much closer to the proximity, but if they're coupled to the ceiling, you're going to be vibrating your building. So that was a really cool thing to simplify that challenge. I guess, you know, as a mixer and as a user, I guess, Josh, I'd like to know on your end what you think the essentials are. And, you know, you have 2 rooms. You have a stereo room and an immersive room. It was one of the reasons I wanted you here because I think in your decisions, there was a lot of things that went into why you did that. Can you maybe expand on what you think the essential elements are for you?
You know, part of the reason why I first got into immersive, just to backtrack a little bit, is because I was having to send off mixes to get them mixed and have to listen to 100 songs, if you will. And it just so happened that we built our Atmos room out of the necessity to deliver those mixes ourselves and control the outcome of it with an artist focus. So that's how I got into immersive mixing. And, you know, my room is a little different because if you jump up, you could touch my ceiling. And Kerry, you know, he was there from the start of it, and so we had to get creative on the build. Kerry doesn't have to jump. So if I had beautiful mounted speakers hanging down, everyone bumped their heads. So for my room, I needed, you know, a system where I could have thin speakers on the top, on the sides. So I don't know. At first, I needed the space. I couldn't do it in my stereo room. It's like 16 by 14, which is a great room for me to mix in personally. And so first of all, I needed the space, and I needed acoustically tuned and outfitted properly. So for me, I rely on the professionals to knock that stuff out. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
So the room, I made this little list of things that were, in my mind, you know, essential, and the room actually, I just, you know, I put it in there as in my mind, but it's such an important point because obviously choosing the right space. Emma, what is the spec of the ceiling height minimums for where your speakers have to go for an Atmos system?
You're asking me?
Oh, Emma.
I mean, yeah, so
Knowing
in
you,
terms
man.
in terms of music and home entertainment rooms, there's not necessarily a hard and fast specification. We have best practices that we encourage people to try to follow if your space allows for it. The answer for me is never no. It's always how can we make this work in the space that you have, because I think it's really important for everyone to be able to access the technology, and people mix incredible records in very unassuming spaces. Our general recommendation is that the overhead speakers are about 8 feet from the floor minimum, but again, sometimes we have to do what we have to do, and there's lots of great, interesting mounting solutions out now to make things happen.
I would say from in the beginning, it was very strictly those specs, and it's become more realistic as people need to be able to use the rooms that they have. And is there any other spacing issues, Emma, that we should be considering from a Dolby certification if we want that, or Dolby best practices?
Yeah, so in terms of certification, we have the kind of theatrical program, which I think is what everyone thinks of as having pretty rigid rules, because that's obviously a very specific environment, specific use case. For music and home entertainment and gaming, podcasting, it's a little bit of a different story. We have those best practices, trying to maintain speaker separation, specifically looking at having the ideal angles correct is generally the most important thing that we're looking at. And so there are tolerances for all of that, though. You're able to work around doors that are in weird places, couches that are in the rear of the room, and so we tried to have that be something that's flexible, and that you're able to achieve a good mixed environment regardless of what the limitations the room might have.
So some of the other things that, and that's really helpful too, to know that things have become much more flexible, to be more adaptable to the way people's rooms are existing or can be adapted to spaces that might be available. Obviously, you need a software platform. I guess I would look at Josh and Rafa. Do you guys have a preference in the way you work in immersive? Do you like working in any specific program, or does it not matter to you?
I use Pro Tools only because that's what I use for stereo. So I want to stay in the same platform, and I want to be compliant to the same platform, and also because very often we don't do every single project with discrete tracks. Sometimes some of the projects, are done from a combination of discrete tracks and some stems, or it depends on the project. Sometimes you are given the source audio and it comes the way it comes. We know that is not your choice. So yeah, I try to, and usually those projects most of the time come from a Pro Tools platform. Even though I do use Logic, I have used Nuendo in the past and whatnot, but that's my main preference. Yeah.
Just the last question for you, Rafa, on that. Is it primarily Dolby Atmos, or are you finding more work in 360 coming up? Or
Dolby Atmos, for the most part. Dolby Atmos.
Josh, just from your perspective on the same topic, is it primarily Pro Tools, or are you agnostic on the software side?
No, it's Pro Tools, yeah.
Seems like that most of our clients that we deal with are in that format, although they sometimes are in Logic as well or Nuendo. As far as the converter, I guess I'm going to ask you, Carrie, how much impact the hardware element is in terms of getting the setup right.
It can be huge. Honestly, it's getting more consistent across different manufacturers, different design choices, and certainly if you are in a situation where you're needing to kind of mix and match solutions, it comes down to how that clock is operating much more than anything else. So the solutions that we kind of started with when adapting from a stereo world were not as vastly diverse as they are now. Today we see manufacturers, Apogee has the Symphony, and DAD has their cores, and all of Focusrite have just introduced a new version of their boxes, and so the manufacturers are realizing that this is a requirement, a need that all of their customers are actually looking towards, and coming up with solutions for this market. Beyond that, it's do you have a console in the way? What are you doing for your monitor control? Because if it's going back into an SSL in some way, or other large format console, well, what's going to work right for that? And I think the changes that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, as certainly as Atmos became much more relevant in market, the footprint of workstations increased, the choice of whether you're USB-C or Dante or HDX or any of those things just blew out of the water. And so we're really in a world where the choice is, what do you like the sound of, not can it do immersive?
Well, I have a couple thoughts on it myself I'd like to share. One is that, so a lot of these advanced boxes, of course we need 16 outputs or something if you're going to be 914 or 916. But one of the other components inside these converters is that the ones that are Dolby Atmos or immersive equipped are going to have EQ, filters, delays, and the ability to do your tuning for your system in those boxes. There's also solutions like the Grace 908 or the Audient Alessa, but it's basically got the, I'm sorry? Aura, thank you. Too many products, not enough time. But they're bringing the tuning tools into the monitor controller, which can also be a great way to parse between stereo and immersive, where the tuning tools are actually in the monitor controller. So if you're switching stereo to immersive, you're not having to set up different patches or work around different hardware. And then in some of the installations, we use the converter to implement whatever curve is matching the spec of that immersive format, and use the monitor controller to control the monitors. Do you find, in your studios, Josh, do you have a monitor, a source that's not your computer, that I don't know, some kind of player or any other format that you're using for another source that you would be A/Bing to, or are you just everything coming right from?
Yeah, everything's coming through. Yeah, that room is strictly just for that. I have a record player with all my records, but it's not set up. I've been wanting to set it up, but yeah, it's just we haven't built it out in that kind of way for the most part.
I think these questions are ones that you can really go over in a lot of more detail. But I think this is meant to kind of give us all the overview of the important decision making. I'm going to jump into another topic, and Sam, I want to ask you to kind of help on this one. Is there any ideal dimensions for an immersive studio? Should it be, square, rectangle, smaller, larger? What have you found in your work?
Never thought about it.
Sure.
Maybe slightly biased here. I believe very strongly that it's not about dimensions, but it's about shape. For the last 20 years, we've been designing control rooms with asymmetric rear corners. And we've been doing that because we get less variance of the low-end response from about 110 hertz down to about 65 hertz at the mix position. So we have more accurate bass response by adding asymmetric rear corners. We splay the walls and the ceilings of 90% of the rooms we build these days. Occasionally we're locked into a rectangular room, which is fine, it just takes more treatment. So for me, it's really about the shaping and not the dimensions. And as I'm hoping to speak about a little bit later, I think the key improvement that you need to make a room, not just a stereo room, but an immersive room is more bass trapping built into the room, not added to it as a finish.
Is that locational, or is it just like molecular, it doesn't matter where it is?
That's interesting. We've tried 3 locations, and we just came up with a 4th, but we've pretty much settled above the monitors, because that's the low point in our splayed ceilings. I'll show that in a minute.
So when you say above the monitors, so if I got my speakers all at ear level, I'm going to put my bass traps actually above the speakers.
We build it into and above the ceiling. We'll show a couple slides.
Yeah, we have some cool real-world examples. Actually, that's one of the things I've found in my work is that the ceiling is such an incredible place to put low-frequency treatment so that you can have a very linear front-to-back response in a room. Not, the old days everybody said, oh, I'm going to put a bass trap in the back of the room, which for immersive, in my experience, isn't the right solution. So.
Yeah, one of the things when we were looking at Josh's situation, we were incredibly lucky that the room that he had was a great sounding room in the first instance, right? It was an incredible mastering room. Formerly, Grumman, right, was in there, and frankly, I walked in and went, I've no idea what this is going to do. Right, and you went, can we do it in here? I was like, maybe. What came out at the end was a result of that kind of great room design that had already occurred. And so a lot of the considerations that had been made for critical analysis of a mastering room previously held up incredibly well. And so the fact that we needed to put the speakers at 7'10" was not a challenge. It was as a result of the great treatment that was already in the space. And so the bass trapping that Sam's talking about, that was kind of in there already, and just resulted in this incredible sound field that we were able to reproduce. So it was a real education at that point. So thanks.
Was that the smallest room you've ever been part of building?
No. It was the smallest one that worked well.
Gotcha.
So you will say that the bass trapping is the biggest issue for any retrofit?
I don't know if it's I think it's I guess I don't think of it as biggest one versus one. It's the one that's the hardest to implement and has the biggest cost impact, because if there are reflection paths, you can throw up an inexpensive diffuser and scatter a reflection or an absorber. But if you want effective low frequency response, now you're into either very expensive and heavy and deep bass traps, or you're building it into the room, which is construction. So I have examples of several stereo rooms where we've gone immersive and we haven't had to change the acoustics of the rooms at all because they were designed with this thought in mind.
So that's in the preparing for immersive. If you're building a stereo room now with the idea that, hey, I'm going to probably make this immersive soon, maybe budgetarily I can't get there yet, or I don't have that workflow yet, so, but you want to make sure that your room is going to conform as you go. Would that affect the stereo room if you hadn't gotten to immersive, but you had prepared for that in terms of bass response?
Nope.
It's just going to make a great room one way or the other. Does the ceiling height affect us in terms of the performance of the room, not just meeting best practices, but the interaction between, should the ceiling height be equidistant to the wall placements of the speakers, or what are those considerations, Sam?
Again, is it a flat ceiling? Is it what do they used to call them, compression ceilings? I always hated those.
Let's get away from compression ceilings.
Yeah. Is it a splayed ceiling, so it doesn't have one height? Is it splayed with a flat back? I mean, again, we ask these, one of the challenges of acoustical design is people want to ask relatively simple questions and they get these very convoluted, difficult answers. And unfortunately, that's because those are the answers. For me, ceiling height is less important than ceiling shape. Right?
So
Like,
you mentioned
you can never get away from having enough cubic volume. Cubic volume is always good. Taller is better. But I would rather have a bass trap that expands up that you don't see inside your shell of a control room and have it drop back down and splay up than I would a straight splayed ceiling at a higher.
What about just a flat ceiling? In my mind, I'm thinking my front speakers and my rear speakers are going to have the same boundary behind them. If the ceiling is flat, if it's splayed up, I'm going to maybe have to adjust my back speakers down on a mount to accommodate that. Does that interaction with the ceiling, and the boundary, element?
Again, we run into, if you have, we like to use acoustical soffits. So if you have an acoustical soffit, until you get down to about 80 hertz, there's no difference, zero. If there is a reflection, if your high-frequency device has a vertical dispersion that's very big and it hits a sloped ceiling, it's coming back to you, not towards the mix position. So generally not a problem. The other thing is that I think that it's more the sidewalls that cause the problems with reflections and putting subs on the ceiling changes everything.
That's, we haven't had a lot of experience putting subs in the ceiling, but I might have to try that now. Kerry, I'm just curious from your perspective, knowing the spec of Dolby and Apple Immersive and helping companies bring their products to the future, do you think, speaker distance and height distance, all these things, should be maintained at as close to a relative distance as possible, or does it not matter with delays, or how does that impact the immersive experience? Best practices.
It matters a lot. As Emma said, we certainly used to try to say yes to as many situations as possible, right? And that necessitated some manipulation of reality, right? The more you can get back to a 0 point on adding delay, adding EQ, adding manipulation to the signal chain at the end, the more transparent that translation is going to be, right? So more and more I've tried to get to a place where we're more equidistant in design. Reducing the reliance on time alignment as much as possible. And really, when you can't fix those situations, it's when it gets really starts to get really expensive, to be honest with you. So one of the things that I did, certainly within some of the designs that I was doing with the team at Apple, was really change how we thought about the frequency response and the necessity for low frequency management. So changed the documentation that was in the Atmos specification, and said, okay, well, if you're low frequency on your main speaker gives up at this frequency, then you need X number of subwoofers, in addition to the to the speaker, and really start to localize where the base management of a particular signal was going to reduce the amount of time alignment we'd need for everything else. And so, creating a multi-way system to support each location was more in keeping with the kind of design ethos of, okay, well, if we're in the optimum listening position at our center location, and we want head tracking to work in headphones, or we want the ability to kind of move through a space, then that response has to be the same throughout the room as much as possible. And so that required that kind of more localized setup. So the room that just opened in Culver City, for example, there is no bass management in the room at all. Every speaker in there is fully is full frequency to the mix position. But we built a bass array out of the LFEs, and that was so that we got more even coverage throughout the entire listening space. Because you can change where the speaker is aimed, and we can get a larger listening area. But the low frequency, if it's coming from a single stimulus at that point, which is this really big set of LFEs, created a power tunnel up the middle, right? And the 21 foot from front to back caused some real problems with a power tunnel. So we actually were able to distribute that low frequency energy and create something that is even across the entire listening area behind the console, right in front of the in front of the back wall. So yeah.
So the answer is keep your speakers equidistant if you can. Yep. In other words, if you're designing from the ground up, you would make the perimeter equal distance, essentially, if the speakers were all going to be located there.
Yeah.
Do you concur with that, Sam, on acoustics level? So, and then the other thing you're bringing up is not just having a single sub source, but having an array of subs that are going around the room. That's been my experience in the rooms that we've built and designed, is that if you just have your sub in the front, there's a very good potential to lose energy as things are panned around the room.
Sorry, just to clarify, it's less about having multiple subs, per se, right? Because what you don't want to add is just too many long waveforms that are going to interact with each other and fight with each other. Anyway, it's being able to support the full frequency range of the signal that's powering that area most effectively, right? And so the more space around the sound field is always better, right? So if you can have a situation where the low frequency disappears, right? If I put a sub right here and fired it at that wall, the chances of it actually interacting as a negative, really reproduce over there, right? You don't want that destructive interference as Sam called out earlier.
I think that all speaks to the point as well of room calibration being something that's often thought of as like the final step of the process that's going to fix everything that went wrong along the way. When in reality, there are so many little things you can do between just placing the speakers in the right place and with everything Sam and Carrie were both talking about that can solve those problems, and you don't even need to fix them in that calibration process. So it's really important.
Room tuning is everything.
Made my career.
And, I think one of these things that we're bringing up here overall is about the human placement, the listening position. And so I just want to ask that directly. Where do I set up my work area? In a stereo room, we always want to be in the front third of the room, to get away from the center of the room. But in Atmos or immersive, it feels like maybe the center is where we want to be.
You never want to be in the center of the room.
So still ahead of the center.
You never want to be in the center of the room.
Exactly. Never want to be in the center of the room.
No, so look.
Everyone say it? Never want to be in the center of the room? With 5 voices?
We all say it together.
Exactly. In harmony?
Beetlejuice.
You never want to be in the center of the room.
Yeah, no, I think I'm assuming that everybody here is much more interested in music rooms than anything else. Yep. Show of hands. Music. Okay. Yeah. So generally speaking, yes. If you're in the front half of the room, you're in a good situation, right? Because you want to be as close to that stereo location that you're used to. You're going to be making an awful lot of decisions based off of how this is also going to sound in stereo. And the evolution of immersive music in this sense has come from stereo. You know, I've said over and over again, right? Stereo is a creation of the recording industry, right? Everyone understand what that means? Yeah. Okay. Up until 1956 or whatever, there was no idea that, you know, the record sales were going to actually be the thing that people wanted to worry about, right? So immersive was the natural way of people listening to things, and then they created, you know, mono records and mono translation and mono things, and then stereo came and blah, blah, blah. Yes? Okay. Audio has always been about waves. So it's always been 3 dimensions. It's always been in this format, right? But the idea that, you know, something has to be created to listen to in stereo is still a very, very powerful and an important characteristic. So the position is, you know, fundamentally 30 degrees off of the center of that left and the right, and, you know, that's where it needs to be aimed.
So basically, we're going to sit at the console like we always have, and we're going to build the immersive experience around that normal 100%. Seating position.
100%.
And that also allows us to switch between stereo and immersive.
Yeah. Can I just say something? The only times I ever got in trouble were in rooms that were set up, like you said incorrectly, where the mix position was more towards the center, dead center of the room. And they probably did it out of their own intuition, thinking that was that was it. But I couldn't even recognize myself mixing in that space. It just weird. It just, yeah.
So
it doesn't feel right.
Just to touch on that 1 second, the reason behind not wanting to be in the center is because that's where all of the reflections and the projections from the corners are going to collect in the center, and therefore cause cancellation and unpredictable cancellations as well.
All right.
So we're gonna switch over. We had 2 laptops, but wasn't working quite as smoothly. So I'm going to hand it off to Sam, who's prepared some real world examples of some of the work he's done around creating these immersive spaces, and we can kind of dig in a little deeper. Sam.
They say the fastest 2 minutes in sports is when they recap the football games. This is going to be the fastest 5 minutes in acoustics. What are the acoustical design goals for stereo mix rooms? I think we all know them. Accuracy at mix, the mixes translate to other spaces, well-defined stereo image, ergonomic workflow, quiet, and design a creative environment. What changes for those goals? Not much. A well-defined stereo image and a 3B, that's great. 3D spatial sense at the mix and extended. You still want the mixes to translate. You still need ergonomics and accuracy. What acoustical design goals change when the control room must support both stereo and immersive mixes? And the answer is more destructive reflection paths and potentially more modal excitation. So effective bass trapping becomes really important. We found 3 places to put bass trapping: front of the room, high and low, the rear of the room, and above monitors. And we added a 4th one under the window, which it's literally under construction now. This is a room I designed, I guess 15 years ago, 16 years ago, for 2016, 10 years ago, originally for stereo and 5.1. Dave Glasser's room in Boulder, Colorado, and you can see there are acoustical soffits up on the corners of the sidewalls. These don't have any chipboard, so they're just acting as absorption and diffusion. There's diffusion on the sidewall. You can see the 3 center speakers, left, right, and center. Here's the rear of the room with 3 types of diffusion, rear speakers, and if you can see them, it's a little bit dark, but these are now the immersive rear uppers. When we laid out this room, we laid out the speakers on a circle that was set back from the center of the room. The red is the building, the yellow is the exterior isolation walls, and the blue is the room shaping. You'll notice that the rear corners of this room are asymmetric, and that's part of our low frequency control at the mix position. The red is diffusive. You can see the upper immersive speakers there. Another picture where you can see the immersive system. There's side speakers are on floor stands. What you don't see here is the bass trapping. And in this case, it's above the ceiling. That's Dave Glasser. And you can see that having asymmetric rear corners is really hard to see in the room. Here's a list of the Dunleavy speakers. And here you can see the section of the room, this area being the bass trap, the asymmetrical corners, the yellow being the bass trap, and the opening being the green, which is just an opening into this area, and through an acoustical soffit, which is fabric, fiberglass, and diffusion. So that's how sound gets in, and it's disruptive to all of the axial and tangential modes in the room. I'm pointing to the opening above my head there. This is a case where we put the bass trap above the monitors. In this case, that bass trap extends 3 feet internally. So from the surface you see, there's 3 feet of absorption of different types in that space above the monitors. There's also low frequency absorption down below the windows. Here's a section with the red line being the isolation floor and ceiling, and you can see the bass trap there. Here's what a bass trap looks like when you're building it with soffits. The soffits are inside of the isolation shell, and the bass trapping is also inside the isolation shell. So we have effective bass trapping, and the cost of it is relatively low from construction. You just need to have the height above to fit it in. Here's another one you can see where it's been gypped in. I got 47 seconds. I'm good. This is a studio where we actually do use delays on the surrounds to do the to get the distances right, because the stereo speakers were placed before the immersives, and we added about 4.5 milliseconds to all of the surrounds. It works incredibly well. This musician may have some hearing problems because he mixes at 118 dB. So what we did was we made the entire rear wall a bass trap. For those of you who know Decibel Dave, that's Decibel being a carpenter, very talented engineer. But there's no chipboard on this wall, and it goes back another 6 feet. And there are hanging banners, and there are bass traps and bass mods. And here you can see we hung diffusers on that wall. This is the isolation mount that Dave and I were discussing yesterday. They're here at the show, and it allows you to do things. But if you're going to hang things on your ceiling, and your ceiling wasn't designed to withstand being vibrated by a loudspeaker, it will cause acoustical problems in your room. There you go.
Nailed it.
Well, that was right. Perfectly timed, Sam. You know, this topic, we could go on for hours, I have a feeling, and we'd love to take more time to get questions. I know we have to change over for the next panel that's coming up. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions over there in the corner?
We have 4 minutes, and people can also hang out in the mezzanine.
Excellent. So we'll take a couple. Is there anybody who has a question? First hand up gets to go first.
Someone ask a question.
I see a hand in the back. Jay, could you bring
Right
that
there.
mic over to the?
Mic out there.
There's a, or step up. Here, there's a mic right up here if you want to bring it to him.
Hi, thank you. So for mixing engineers, like on a budget, what's your opinion on like immersive, to make that transition from stereo to immersive, like what's your opinion on starting off with like immersive headphones? And do you have any recommendations, on what to look out for those types of headphones, while we look to kind of fix the room up and get the speaker systems?
Yeah, you can start in headphones, and it doesn't have to be immersive headphones, just any set of headphones. I think the best headphones in the world are the ones you already know well. So it's definitely a very common workflow to start in headphones with the DAW or the renderer. We do recommend checking it at least in a studio that is 714 or more, and that it is dictated in a lot of the delivery specifications, whether it's to the labels or the streaming services. But that's definitely a common workflow. It's a great way to get started and learn the tools and learn the ropes.
Great, thank you.
I will say it is really, really hard.
You want to grab the mic?
Unless you've spent a lot of time listening in a room, it is really hard to get it right, starting just in headphones. So the more you can then listen and translate and make sure that you're not thinking that you're doing something that you're not, the better. So, if you're on a budget, great. Find a friend who has a room and spend some time with them going through the workflow as well and making sure that what you're doing and hearing is actually getting to that real world experience.
That makes sense, thank you.
So just on that topic as well, affordability is an important thing. There's a couple brands out there that I've had a lot of experience with. One is Cali, and the other being iLoud. The MTM series. Some of those speakers that are very small actually are pretty well balanced, especially if you have a small room and you're going to be fairly close to them. Rich Keller, who couldn't be here today, his room is in his basement of his house. It's treated to the best that it could be, and then he's got that speakers, but he's mixed hundreds and hundreds of immersive tracks on that, and that system could be had for under $7,000 or $8,000. So I know we have to break, and so what I'd ask is anybody would like to continue this conversation, we'll be out here on the mezzanine for a little bit. You could also come by our booth, Pro Design and Augspurger. We're at the ACC North Hall on the lower level, and we'd love to continue this conversation with all of these great guests. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.